In this presentation, we'll take a look at dependents for federal income taxes 2018. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Importance of dependents. Are dependents still important? It's going to change a lot for 2018 than 2017, in part because the exemptions have gone away. We've lost the personal and dependent exemptions. So when we think about the 2018 dependents, then the question is, what's the relevance of the dependents? And they are still relevant to have the dependents. In other words, we typically will benefit if we have the dependents. So first, there's a child tax credit, and that has increased. So if we have a qualified child, then of course that would be a benefit due to the child tax credit typically. The filing status is going to be a big difference as well. So remember that we always want to take a step up on the filing status, and oftentimes that's going to be done with a dependent in order to help us to qualify for another status. In other words, if we're in something like a single status, having a dependent could help us to get to the head of household status. And if we were at the head of household status, then we'd have better tax rates. We're not going to get the exemption that we would in 2017, but we are going to get, if it's a child, the child tax credit, and we're going to get possibly a better filing status, which could help us out on the taxes, the tax rates, and the standard deduction. These are going to be the major benefits. We may also have a credit if we have a non-qualifying child, but the credit will be smaller, but we may get some benefit from a dependent if they're not a qualified child, even though we're losing the exemption. And then we also have some other issues that will be related in part to, or many of them will be, the filing status. So when we think about different filing statuses, which are dependent on dependents many times, then that's going to change other things. As we've talked about, the rates will typically change. Also things like caps and phase outs of different types of deductions or credits. Those types of things will be adjusted as well, depending on different types of filing statuses. Dependents must meet 3 general tests in order to be claimed as a dependent on the tax return. 1, dependent taxpayer test. That is, if dependent is claimed by someone else, the taxpayer cannot claim the person as dependent, meaning the dependent can only be claimed on one tax return. So if the dependent's going to be claimed in another tax return, then clearly it cannot be claimed on our tax return. So if we're thinking about having a dependent claimed on our tax return, if the dependent is claimed or can be claimed somewhere else, then of course we can't have that same benefit of the dependent being on 2 tax returns. And this is something that will clearly be seen by the IRS. If the Social Security number of the dependent, which we must put on there in order to claim them, is also claimed somewhere else, then there's going to be a problem, and it'll be clearly picked up just by the system and the IRS. It'll be two Social Security numbers. Joint return test. Person claimed as a dependent cannot file a married filing joint return unless there is no tax liability on the return. So if we're going to claim someone as a dependent, they can't be married, because when they file their return as being married, they're going to have an exemption based in terms of their married filing joint status typically. So typically the idea is that if someone is married, then they're probably not going to be dependent on someone other than the family of the spouse, and therefore shouldn't be qualified as a dependent on another return. Now, there is an exception if there's basically no income or tax liability, and the married couple had income that there was withholdings on, so they filed just in order to get the refund of the taxes that were withheld, but there's actually no tax liability. Then in that case, you may have an objection or a situation where we have a married filing joint return filed, no tax liability, and still possibly be able to be claimed as a dependent on another return. Citizen or resident test. So we have to be a U.S. citizen, resident, or national, resident of Canada or Mexico, adopt a child of the taxpayer if the child is a member of the taxpayer's household all year and the taxpayer is a U.S. citizen or national. Now we're going to take a look at the qualifying child must meet 5 tests. So in other words, to be a qualifying child, which will have the added benefit, one of which would be the ability possibly to take the tax credit, the child tax credit, which is huge. So if it's possible to have a qualified child as the dependent, you would have to meet these additional tests. And that would be the relationship test, the age test, the residency test, the support test, and the special test for qualifying child of more than one taxpayer. In other words, if we had something like a divorce situation and the child could possibly qualify on either the returns from the husband and spouse, then we'd have to use other tests in order to know which return can claim, because we can't have the same dependent be claimed on two returns, because again, that's just, you can't have that. One social security number cannot be claimed on two different tax returns. So those tests in more detail: relationship test, the taxpayer's child or stepchild, whether by blood or adoption, foster child, sibling, or step-sibling, or descendant of one of these. Then we have the residence test, has the same principal residence as the taxpayer for more than half of the tax year. So same principal residence, basically living there for more of the tax year. So you got to consider that when you're thinking about school and divorce situations and whatnot, different types of living situations. Now, there's an exception apply in certain cases for children of divorced or supported parents. So note that, so in divorce cases, of course, we have some exceptions that could apply because that's going to be a special circumstance. Supported parents also is going to be a special case, and that's typically because we may need more special care for supported parents, and they want to give the ability to do that. If we have to have outside care, then maybe it's not as possible to live within the household in those conditions. Kidnapped child, temporary absences, and for children who were born or died during the year. So those would be kind of obvious exceptions here. If they were born during the year or died during the year, then we may not have a half a year, but still be able to meet that half-year test given the circumstances. Then we have the age test. Must be under the age of 19 at the end of the year, or under the age of 24 if a full-time student for at least 5 months of the year, or be permanently and totally disabled at any time during the year. The one here that comes up most often, of course, is if a child is going to college. So if the child is going to college, then you got up to 24. If the child is full-time, so we have to be able to qualify for the full-time student for at least 5 months of the year. So we gotta, if those are going to be some major qualifications, oftentimes are fairly common in many situations. Support test: did not provide more than one half of his/her own support for the year. In other words, the dependent that we're trying to claim, if we're trying to claim a dependent on our return, we're basically supporting them, which means that we're paying more than half of their support for the year. Or if they are paying more than half of their support for the year, then we're not supporting them and therefore wouldn't be meeting the support test. So if there's a substantial amount of income, of course, with the dependent that we're considering to claim, probably not the case, because if they're making a considerate amount of income, they may be supporting themselves with their own income. Then we have the qualifying relative test. So we must meet 4 tests to be a qualifying relative. What this means, the qualifying relatives, is that it's not a qualified child. So what we're saying here is, okay, we're looking for this individual to be a dependent, but they don't qualify as a qualifying child. Can we still claim them as a dependent? And if so, that may help us with our filing status, if we're going to be single or head of household, or it may help us with a credit related to the non-child dependent tax credit. So in this case, then, we would say it's a dependent, but it's not a qualifying child, of course. Otherwise, it would be a qualifying child dependent. And this is clearly not. That we're looking for a dependent that's not a qualifying child. So then we have the relationship or membership of the household test. We have the gross income test. Cannot have gross income equal or greater than $4,050. That's a pretty low test right there. So it's not that's oftentimes will take out an individual based on that income test. So just be careful on that. And we also have the support test, which is similar to the prior support test we looked at for the qualifying child. And this may seem a bit redundant, because if the income is going to be less than $4,050, then they're probably going to be needing the support test, or meet the support test as well. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.